When Liam Maddox bought his home in the quiet, postcard-perfect neighborhood of Willowstone Ridge, he believed, like so many others, that the HOA rules were strict but reasonable. What he did not expect was that those same rules would be twisted into a weapon against him. The conflict began 3 months after he moved in, when HOA President Evelyn Brecker showed up at his door with a clipboard, a stiff smile, and a packet of papers that felt more like a summons than a welcome. She informed him that his home's exterior paint color, a soft slate blue he personally chose and paid for, did not match the approved palette and therefore must be repainted within 30 days. Liam was stunned. His paint color had been approved by the previous HOA administration before he purchased the home, and the color matched nearly identical shades on houses 2 streets over. But Evelyn insisted the palette had been updated, and like a bulldozer wrapped in pearls. She delivered the message without a single crack of sympathy. Liam tried reasoning with her, pointing out that the shade was not only compliant, but also listed in the HOA guidelines he received during purchasing. Evelyn dismissed this, claiming those guidelines were outdated and that the new approved color list was exclusive to board members for now. That was the first red flag. The second came a week later when an official HOA violation notice arrived, demanding that Liam repaint his entire 2-story home using one of the authorized vendors, all of which just so happened to be strangely connected to one another's same phone numbers. Same pricing sheets, same mandatory consultation fee. It smelled of corruption. But Liam didn't have proof yet. Still, something told him this wasn't about color at all. It was about control. Evelyn's control. Her emails grew pushier, her tone colder, and the threats of escalating fines began piling up like a storm on the horizon. Liam wasn't the type to back down, especially when he knew he was being targeted unfairly. And so he began digging. He called the paint manufacturer directly to verify the shade number and the HOA approval records. What he discovered would ignite the fuse of the entire story. The HOA was lying, and worse. They were hiding something that would blow the entire board apart. Asterisk. Liam's call with the paint manufacturer began as a simple verification, but quickly spiraled into something far more alarming. When he provided the representative with the shade code printed on the leftover paint can, the man on the other end paused longer than expected. He asked Liam to repeat the code twice, and requested photos of the can, the label, and the surface of Liam's house in natural light. Liam sent them immediately. 10 minutes later, the representative called back, this time with a tone that carried both confusion and concern. He explained that the paint code Liam supplied was not from the current or past catalogs. In fact, it wasn't a standard shade at all. It was a custom formula, produced under a special order by a vendor registered to Willowstone Ridge HOA Procurement Office. Liam felt his stomach twist. Why would Evelyn or any HOA member go through the trouble of ordering a custom paint formula? Why demand that homeowners repaint using approved vendors if the formula wasn't even official? Something didn't add up. The manufacturer then revealed the part that made Liam sit up straight. 6 other homes in Willowstone had also been repainted using that same custom formula, yet only 3 of those homeowners had filed formal complaints about being pressured into repainting. 2 had eventually moved away. The pattern was obvious. Evelyn wasn't enforcing rules. She was running a scheme. Liam asked the representative to email him records of the custom orders. And while policy prevented the release of certain details, the representative agreed to send a verification letter confirming that the shade was not part of any standardized HOA palette and had been requested through an account linked to the board. That letter would soon become his most important weapon, but Liam didn't stop there. He walked the neighborhood taking photos of every house he suspected had been targeted. Some of the paint jobs looked fresh and suspiciously similar to his own shade, but under different lighting. The tones varied slightly, almost like failed attempts at recreating the same color. It suggested something else. Someone was charging residents premium, RATES, for the repainting, but not even delivering the correct product. Liam realized he wasn't just dealing with a rule-obsessed president. He was dealing with someone who might be pocketing money. And if that was true, this was bigger than a paint dispute. It was fraud, manipulation, and intimidation wrapped in the false authority of HOA policies. Liam knew a showdown was coming, and he was ready to gather evidence piece by piece. By the time Liam returned home, he had 2 folders full of photos, screenshots, and notes. Every detail mattered now. He laid everything out across his dining table, like a detective solving a case. Paint cans from neighbors, HOA letters with suspiciously similar phrasing, even timestamps showing that Evelyn had sent multiple violation notices outside permissible hours. The deeper he looked, the more the pattern emerged. Evelyn had been exploiting homeowners new to the subdivision. Those unfamiliar with the HOA's true rules were easier to pressure, especially if she framed the repaint orders as urgent compliance issues. It explained why long-term residents seemed untouched. She targeted the newcomers who feared starting their homeownership journey with legal trouble. But the real breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an elderly neighbor named Harold, who had lived in Willowstone Ridge for 18 years. When Liam approached him casually about paint colors, Harold lowered his voice instantly and warned him to be careful. Harold revealed that he, too, had been pressured years ago, but he stood up to the board and threatened to contact the county compliance office. Evelyn, who was relatively new to the presidency then, backed off immediately. Harold admitted he suspected something shady ever since a contractor slipped up and mentioned being on a retainer from the HOA president herself. That statement confirmed Liam's suspicion. Evelyn had created a personal arrangement with specific vendors for repainting jobs. Harold went further. He said the HOA never updated the palette officially. The so-called new list Evelyn referenced didn't exist in any recorded meeting minutes. She had forged it, using it as a justification to funnel money into repainting contracts connected to her. Liam felt both furious and energized. If Harold's memory aligned with the manufacturer's letter, he now had proof from 2 independent sources that the palette change was a lie. That's when Harold handed Liam a small thumb drive. "This," he whispered, "contains the last 5 years of public HOA meeting recordings. Evelyn doesn't know I keep them." Liam thanked him and rushed home. To his shock, several recordings revealed moments where Evelyn avoided formal votes, manipulated wording of motions, or privately recommended certain contractors before meetings. It wasn't just unethical, it was calculated. Armed with this new evidence, Liam knew he had enough to take the next step, expose Evelyn to the entire community. The next morning, I decided to get answers directly. I drove to the manufacturer's regional office, expecting a routine conversation about distribution or stock issues. What I got instead felt like stepping into the first chapter of a crime novel. The representative, a middle-aged man named Carter, greeted me with the kind of confused expression that told me immediately something was off. When I showed him the HOA's email, insisting that only Driftwood Taupe No. 77B was approved, he frowned, then asked me to wait. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 more employees, both carrying tablets displaying product logs. Their first question: "Where did your HOA say they buy this paint?" I explained everything, how the board insisted there was only one supplier, how homeowners were forced to purchase from a specific warehouse, and how the price was nearly 40% higher than retail. The staff exchanged looks. Then Carter sighed and said something that made my stomach drop. "That paint code does exist, but we discontinued it 8 years ago." I felt my pulse spike. Then how is my HOA requiring it? I asked. Carter explained that discontinued colors were not produced anymore. Any legitimate distributor couldn't sell large batches without a special request form, and no such request had been filed. That meant one thing. Either someone was illegally relabeling another paint as this old color, or the HOA was lying entirely. Carter asked for the sample I'd purchased. When he opened it, he shook his head instantly. This isn't driftwood taupe. This is a generic low-quality exterior mix, sold in bulk for contractors on extremely cheap projects. He turned the can to show me a tiny, nearly invisible sticker under the main label one that most homeowners would never notice. This sticker belongs to a discount contractor supply yard. They don't produce branded colors. Someone replaced the label. In that moment, the entire scam came into view. The HOA, or someone connected to it, was forcing homeowners to buy cheap, repackaged paint at inflated prices while pretending it was premium, manufacturer approved. And if I hadn't asked questions, I would have painted my entire home with fake paint that wouldn't survive one monsoon season. Carter asked if he could keep the can for internal investigation. I agreed. But as I left the office, one question repeated in my mind. Who was benefiting from this scam, and how far were they willing to go to protect it? By the time I got home, I had already decided that staying quiet wasn't an option. If the HOA was forcing families to buy fake paint for inflated prices, then every resident in the community had been scammed and potentially thousands of dollars were involved. I began gathering evidence, photos of the can, screenshots of the HOA rules, invoices from other neighbors, and every single email exchange I'd had with the board. The pattern became disturbingly clear. Every homeowner who had recently repainted showed the same supplier listed on the receipt. Same warehouse, same exclusive approval, same inflated cost. When I started asking around, neighbors opened up quickly. Many felt pressured, some felt intimidated, and others admitted they'd wanted to complain but feared retaliation from surprise inspections to fines. Several told me the same story. Whenever they questioned the required color or the supplier, the HOA President Lance personally warned them that known compliance would lead to penalties or even legal action. That was when the real twist came. An older resident, Mrs. Turner, quietly handed me a folder she had kept for years. Inside were printed emails from a former HOA treasurer who had resigned abruptly 3 years earlier. The emails suggested concerns over unapproved vendor relationships and vendor kickbacks tied to paint procurement. Mrs. Turner whispered. He tried to expose them. They threatened to sue him for defamation. He moved out the next month. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, the hostile reaction I'd received made perfect sense. This wasn't about color aesthetics. This was about money, power, and controlling a scheme that had been operating for years. I knew going to Lance directly would only put a target on my back. Instead, I compiled my evidence into a digital folder, backed it up in the cloud, and prepared to file an official complaint with the State Housing Authority. But before I could submit it, something happened that confirmed the HOA knew exactly what I was doing. That night, while reviewing my notes near the living room window, I noticed headlights pause in front of my house. The car didn't move. The silhouette of the driver didn't move either. Someone was watching me. And when the car finally drove off, I realized that exposing this scam wouldn't just be inconvenient for the HOA, it would be dangerous. The next morning, things escalated. I stepped outside to retrieve a package from the porch and found a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. The accusation? Suspicious activity and failure to maintain property in accordance with community standards. It was so vague it was laughable, but the intent was clear. Intimidation. The fine listed at the bottom, $35,000, was not funny. I immediately called the HOA office. But the receptionist claimed she had no information, and that all complaints were filed by the president himself. Lance was moving fast, and he wasn't being subtle. I paced my living room, frustration boiling. They were trying to shut me up before I could expose them. But the notice had the opposite effect. I snapped photos of it and added them to my evidence folder. That's when Carter, the paint manufacturer representative, called. His voice carried urgency. "We ran the samples you gave us, and there's something you need to know." He explained that the paint wasn't just low grade, it contained an illegal concentration of lead components banned in residential areas. The paint was not only fake, not only cheap, but unsafe. This changed everything. Carter told me their legal team wanted to open a formal investigation and needed me to provide any documentation I had about distribution. Before we hung up, he added, "You might want to be careful. Whoever is behind this isn't small." I ended the call and sat in silence, processing the gravity of what I'd stumbled into. A scam involving illegal materials, forged labels, inflated prices, and HOA enforcement. This was bigger than a corrupt board. It was potentially criminal. And now they knew I was onto them. That evening, while reviewing everything one last time before submitting it to state authorities, my internet suddenly cut out. My phone signal dropped near zero. A blackout, but only for my house. My neighbor's porch lights stayed on. My stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident. Someone was interfering. Someone with access to community utilities. Someone who wanted me isolated and offline. I realized with chilling clarity that I was no longer dealing with a petty HO, a dispute. I was dealing with people willing to break the law to keep their scam alive, and willing to silence anyone who threatened it. Asterisk by the next day. I knew I needed help beyond neighborhood complaints or manufacturer reports. This had turned into something that needed legal protection, so I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA corruption cases. Her name was Mara, sharp-eyed, calm, and the kind of person who didn't flinch even when I explained the threats, the fake paint scheme, and the sudden utilities blackout. She listened carefully before saying, "This is not just an HOA dispute. This is fraud, product misrepresentation, and potentially environmental crime. If they try to retaliate again, we file an injunction." For the first time, I felt a bit of solid ground under me. Mara helped me organize my evidence into a formal packet and drafted a complaint to the State Housing Regulatory Board, which oversaw HO, legal compliance. We were preparing to submit it when something unexpected happened. Carter, the manufacturer representative, called with breaking news. His team had traced the sticker code on the paint can. It led to a distributor owned by Gable Contracting, a company run by none other than Lance's brother. My jaw tightened. Suddenly the whole picture snapped together. Lance, wielding HO, a power to require a discontinued paint color. His brother supplying illegally relabeled product. Homeowners purchasing at inflated rates. And the HOA collecting silent kickbacks. It was a perfect closed-loop scam, and I had uncovered it. That afternoon, as if on cue, another violation notice appeared, this one accusing me of unauthorized modifications to exterior fixtures, even though nothing had changed. The harassment was escalating. When Mara saw the notice, she didn't hesitate. "Good," she said. "They just proved retaliation." She prepared an emergency filing for legal protection. But while she worked, I received a text from an unknown number. "Stop. You don't know what you're getting into." No name, no signature, just a warning. I showed Mara. She replied calmly, "This means we're right over the target." That evening, as I sat by the window, I noticed movement outside. A man I didn't recognize was walking slowly past my house, stopping just long enough to glance toward my front door before continuing down the street. Another intimidation tactic. But instead of fear, something else settled inside me, a cold determination. If they wanted to scare me into silence, they were too late. I had evidence, I had legal support, and now I had confirmation of a criminal connection. And soon, the authorities would have it too. The following morning began with chaos, but this time, not inside the neighborhood. Mara called me with a tone I hadn't heard before, a mix of urgency and restrained triumph. The state board responded faster than expected, she said. They've opened a preliminary investigation and scheduled an on-site inspection for your community. That meant inspectors, lawyers, and regulatory officers would soon walk through the HOA office and dig into financial records, vendor contracts, and violation logs. Lance wouldn't be able to hide anything. When I peeked outside, however, I realized word must have already reached him. 3 HOA board members were gathered near the clubhouse, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. One of them noticed me watching and immediately turned away. The pressure was shifting, and they felt it. A few hours later, Carter arrived at my house in person, accompanied by a member of his corporate legal team. They brought documentation proving the paint was counterfeit and hazardous, including detailed lab reports and photographs comparing legitimate and fake samples. This, the attorney said, tapping the report, is enough to trigger federal involvement if necessary. Suddenly, my case had expanded far beyond HOA overreach. We were edging into consumer fraud and environmental violation territory. As Carter and the attorney left, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to hurried over, glancing around nervously. "I heard what's going on," he whispered, "and you're not alone. Many of us have been forced into buying that same paint, and we're sick of it. If this blows open, the whole board might collapse." His support meant more than he knew. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about an entire community manipulated and extorted for years. By evening, things reached a climax. As I stepped outside to lock my gate, a black SUV rolled up and stopped directly in front of me. The passenger window lowered slowly, revealing Lance behind the wheel. His expression wasn't angry. It was smug. "You think you're helping people," he said calmly, "but all you're doing is making things worse for yourself." I didn't respond. I just held my phone up and recorded him. His smirk vanished instantly. After a moment of silence, he drove off without another word. That was the moment I knew the tide had officially turned. He was rattled, he was exposed, and his facade of control was cracking. The next morning, everything erupted at once. The State Housing Regulatory Board investigators arrived in 3 official vehicles and walked straight into the HOA office. Homeowners gathered outside, whispering, shocked but curious. It didn't take long before voices inside grew loud enough to reach the parking lot. One inspector came out briefly to photograph the paint on various homes, including mine, and to collect samples. Meanwhile, another group demanded access to the HOA's financial records, contractor agreements, and communication logs with Gable Contracting. Within an hour, 2 board members emerged red-faced and arguing with each other, blaming one another for approving the paint requirements. Lance, however, was nowhere in sight, not at the clubhouse, not driving around the neighborhood. He had vanished the moment the inspectors arrived. Around noon, Mara arrived and joined the investigators, offering the compiled packet of evidence we had prepared. The lead investigator reviewed the text messages, the fake paint reports, the retaliation notices, and even the mysterious threatening text. "This is worse than we expected," the investigator muttered. "This isn't just regulatory misconduct. This may become a criminal investigation." The words carried a weight that made several nearby homeowners stop talking. Suddenly everything felt bigger, heavier, more real. As the investigators continued their sweep, the community atmosphere shifted dramatically. Neighbors who once stayed silent began approaching the officials to share their own experiences: forced purchases, unexplained fines, aggressive threats, and inflated mandatory service fees. It was as if one spark my initial resistance had ignited a long-suppressed fire. Even the HOA secretary, who had always acted terrified of crossing Lance, finally stepped forward. With trembling hands, she handed the investigators a flash drive. "You should see this. I've been saving everything. Just in case." That just in case was now. Later that afternoon, law enforcement quietly arrived, not to arrest anyone yet, but to escort investigators as they reviewed the newly received documents. The air was thick with tension as officers moved between buildings. This time, homeowners watched not with fear, but with a mix of relief and anticipation. As for me, I stood on my porch, hands in my pockets, when Carter returned with a final update. The manufacturer had issued a formal public statement confirming the paint was counterfeit, hazardous, and illegally distributed. Every homeowner forced to buy it had grounds for damages. Lance was finished, and I could feel it dot by evening. The HOA office was officially sealed for investigation, and word spread that Lance had been located attempting to leave town. Officers intercepted him, questioned him, and although they didn't arrest him on the spot, they confiscated his electronics and issued a summons. Homeowners gathered in small groups, talking about everything from refunds to possible dissolution of the HOA board. For the first time in years, people seemed hopeful instead of afraid. The next day, an emergency community meeting was held under state supervision. Mara attended with me, sitting in the front row as investigators explained the findings. Fraudulent procurement, illegal materials, misappropriation of funds, retaliation against homeowners, falsified violation notices, and the personal involvement of Lance and his brother's contracting firm. Gasps filled the room. One elderly homeowner cried softly. Another shouted, "We knew it." We all knew something was wrong. Investigators announced the board's immediate suspension and the appointment of a temporary state-managed administrator. When the floor was opened for public comment, dozens of residents stood up sharing stories, thanking me, and finally speaking without fear of HOA retaliation. One neighbor said, "You didn't only protect your home. You freed the whole neighborhood." Their words hit me harder than I expected. But the story wasn't done yet. A week later, a court order mandated full restitution to all homeowners who purchased the fake paint. Lance and his brother faced charges for fraud and environmental violations. The HOA bylaws were rewritten to prevent unilateral product requirements ever again. And my house, my front porch, my mailbox, my walls finally felt like my own again. Carter visited one last time to see the corrected work and the safe, legitimate paint properly applied. "You started a chain reaction," he said with a smile. "Most people never fight back. But you did." As he left, I realized something important. I had gone from being just another homeowner struggling against unfair rules to someone who exposed corruption and helped rebuild a community. And as the sun set over my freshly painted home, I finally felt the peace I'd been fighting for.